Welcome back to my channel. In part 2, in this episode, I'm going to explain what the process is if both parties still don't reach an agreement and the maintenance officer attempts to mediate an agreement. All the children's expenses should be captured on the J101 and they'll be looked at by the maintenance officer, and he'll check to see if they've all been included, if the calculations are correct. I've included case law in the description below. If you wish to know more, it's always interesting to read these and get an idea of what is actually accepted and what isn't. And you can bring it to their attention if they don't know. So the direct expenses and indirect expenses. And it's the indirect expenses that people generally battle with. And the most common one being accommodation, the bond, housing, rent. So it's standard practice that 2 parts per adult and 1 part per child. So it'll be 2/3, 1/3 if you have 1 child. It's not written in the Maintenance Act, but as I said, it's standard practice. The food is split, obviously taking the kid's age into account. A toddler, 3-year-old toddler is not going to eat as much as a 16-year-old boy. And this is why you are asked to provide slips so that it can be established exactly what is spent. I would suggest that you use an app like Expensify to scan all of your receipts in. One, they don't fade, and many of them do a monthly calculation, which makes it so much easier. The other thing is also to keep a spreadsheet and break down your expenses. It's easier to know exactly how much you spend and on what. And when you go to court, submit a copy of this as an attachment. So it's so much easier for a maintenance officer to get an idea of where the money is going and prevents unnecessary questions. This also helps up with typical responses from respondents who go, oh, she uses the money all for herself or on her own expenses. And we know the most common one is she spends it on her nails and her hair. And it really floors me when the only income is a child grant. Can you imagine if the mother has her nails done and her hair, and she's all glamorous and she's sitting there just watching her child starve to death? I mean, really. The other joint household expenses like water, electricity, etc. are split equally amongst the people who live in the residence. Some MOs are known to have told applicants to change their soap brands, for example. And I think that's a bit ridiculous, because if they asked if the child has sensitivity issues, I could understand that. Or if they're going to apply the same principle to both parents. Yeah, then it's fine. If you're going to tell one to shop at a cheaper place, then the other one as well. We know that where possible, children should be kept in the standard of living that they're accustomed to. But having said that, when families split, there's always going to be compromises, because you now have 2 households to take into account. But what's not okay is if one parent is having to make all the compromises and the other parent isn't. And we know that no 2 cases are the same, so each one is judged on its own merits. So the 5 fundamentals that are really considered or given priority are shelter, food, clothes, education, and health care. And I still say that if a parent is on a medical aid, that the child should automatically be put onto the medical aid. Because most primary caregivers do not have access to medical aid, and they're having to use government health facilities for their children. And if the best interest of the child is paramount, then I think this should be an absolute must. The child does not have the ability to change its circumstances, and it depends on the parents making reasonable decisions. If the parents have the means, then yeah, extramural activities are taken into account. So when all of the expenses have been scrutinized fairly by the maintenance officer, they will look at the parent's income. If, for example, one parent earns twice as much as the other, their contribution will be proportionate to their earnings, and by all accounts should have to contribute twice as much. There's no such thing as a 50-50 split, unless both parents earn exactly the same amount. Both parents' incomes and expenses should be equally scrutinized. Often only the applicant's expenses are scrutinized, and maintenance is a priority payment, and it should be considered before debt. You must go and rearrange their debt, go and renegotiate their debt. I have included a section in the description that pertains to that. So let's assume that all of the above is in place and that both parents have accepted the amount. You will then be required to complete a J214, which is an order of consent. This will be placed in your file once it's been signed and date stamped by the magistrate. Yeah, you both will get a copy, and if the world was a perfect place, you should get your first maintenance on the due date. But please do not hold your breath. It could be fatal. If you're not happy with the proposal that the maintenance officer has come up with, then you do not have to sign it. It will then be referred to the maintenance court, and the court can recommend a Section 10 inquiry, and this is conducted in court with a magistrate, and when necessary they can subpoena any witness, and any party has a right to legal representation. So often there's a lot of postponements in this process, and when everything has been taken into account, the magistrate will make a decision. If you're not happy with the magistrate's decision, you can always appeal it with the magistrate's commission. If it's going to be postponed, please remember to insist on an interim order. Until next time.